Hello friends, and welcome to video number 7 of our course Building a Website Application Using Spring Boot. In previous video we learned how to authenticate a user that wished to log into your web application using a login form, and we built the back end of this process, and the back end was consisting of multiple classes and interfaces that we have implemented, and starting with the DIO, with the model, with the repository, and at the end of which we reached to the service, and this service we used it in the controller. Now this process is applicable for any connection between the application and the database. So whatever, if it is a login, if it's a sign up, if it's any connection with the database, you need to go through this process, all these classes and interfaces. One thing I want to add, when we want to authenticate when we want to authenticate the user, we use this login repository, as you remember in the previous video. Now I would like to show you another way, which is considered as to be the lengthy way, the old way of the authentication. In this way, for those of you who wish to use it and don't want to use this way of authentication using the login repository, in this way what we will do is that we will create a session with the database. This is the first point. We will use this class, the Hibernate Session Util. It's a utility class, and you can get it from the GitHub. This is the class, but the same name you can get from the GitHub. And this class uses a session factory. This session factory will generate for you a session, and you can use this session for the connection with the database. Now remember one thing, this session factory is a heavy object, so you don't have to use it frequently, because it's a heavy object and it consumes your resources, the server resources, the memory resources. So you have to use it only once to generate a session, and then use this session for multiple connections with the database. Now one other thing is that you need to add the models that you use in your project in here, because by default these models are not coming with the class, so you need to add these models of your project in here. In my case, I'm adding the model, login model, sign up model, and the role model. Okay, once you have done, you are good to go to use this session factory in your project. So this is the first step. We will use this class, and we call this class method to open a session. We will get a session. This is a Hibernate session, and then we need to get a transaction object, also a Hibernate transaction. And the first step of this process of the implementation is that we call this session dot begin transaction. We call this method begin transaction. This is the first transaction object that we will get, which we'll use to connect to the database. Now the second thing is that we need to query the database. We get the details from the login form, the email and the password, and we query it with what is saved in the database, what is persisted in the database. Now there is an old way for the query statement, which is the SQL query statement. And you remember, I presume that you know that in the query statement with the SQL we write the column names. But I'm not using this SQL, I'm using the HQL. It's more robust, it's more give you more flexibility. I'm using the HQL, which is the Hibernate query language. And the difference is that instead of using the database columns, we will use the model class, which will call the fields. This is the main difference. And you can get more information about the HQL in this reference. For those of you who wish to adopt this way. Now for the querying, we will have two options. I will go with two options, either the regular option, which is calling the model, and we call the field, whatever field in here for the model, the email field, the password field, okay? And there is another way, which is we will use the named queries annotations. We will annotate the model with this annotation. So I will start first with this way. Now in your model, as you can see here, the session get named query, we will call something, this thing, and I will show you what is this thing. We will get a query of generic type query, and then we will use this object of the query to set parameters. We will give a name for the parameter, and we will call the data from the database, and we will query them. Now where we get these details? As a login model, if you see here, there is a notation called named queries. In this named queries, you can create a query, named query. This is a query which is the same as this. It will do the same what this will do, but this we will do it with the annotation. So you can place multiple queries, multiple named queries. You just add here you add a comma at the end, and then you can start another named query. That's why here it's named queries, and here named query. So you can add multiple query in here. You give it this named query a name, which will be this name, and then you write the query statement. This is a select statement, so we call the model object, the login model object, and we call the field, the same thing with the password field, from the login class, login model class, where login model object dot field, we give it a name, the parameter name. This name we will add it in here for the email, and another one for the password. You can select whichever name, of course, suitable for you, and use the password name for this parameter in here. This is the entire process, and of course order by login model row number. The order will be from the first row onward. This is what the SQL, this is what the named query annotation, you can use it in the model. Remember one thing, for the select you can use this way, only for the select. For querying you can use the SQL with the named query, and I will show you later what this means. You just have to remember, only for the select you can use this named queries, named query for the select type. Okay, now we have the annotation linked to this model, and we have set a name for the query, and we have set the statement of the query. Now we can refer to it when we call the session.getNamedQuery, and we add the name that we have set it up in here. This is the entire process if we want to use the annotation, the SQL annotation. Now the other way for querying the data is the regular way, same as the SQL. You call the login model class, but we will not use the column name, we will use the login model, and we call the fields, and then from the login model as well, same as this query we have done in here, the same statement. And then we query as before, create query, we call the statement, and then we set the parameters, the same names of the parameters that we have done, and at the end of which we will get a result set, and this result set, if it's size over 0, more than 0, or it's not null, that means this this authentication process is true, and this user can access to your web application. Otherwise it's false. It means that this user has no registration with your database and he cannot access your web application. Once you have done this, now you need to flush this transaction. You have to flush it and then you commit it. Don't forget to commit the transaction. This statement is exactly as this statement, so you are free to use whichever you wish. Now, in case there have been an exception with this transaction, if there is any transaction in the process for whatever reason, if an exception happened, then you need to roll back. You need to roll back. You have to roll back. Make sure that you do this step. And once done, everything done, then you have to close this session. This is the second way if you wish to use it, rather than the way I've used it with the login repository. It's totally up to you, whichever you prefer, which way you prefer. Now let's see the sign up. When a user wants to sign up, as I said, when your user wants to sign up, it's the same process. It's the same classes and interfaces that we need to create, but there are some differences in the process, and I will show you the differences right now. Okay, now I opened all the classes and interfaces. As you can see, the same thing: DAO, model, repository, and services, and the controller. But now we will not use the login, we will use the register method. And also for the register we have a fragment for it. If you remember, for the fragment we have created also for the register fragment. This is the register fragment, and you can see it in the website. By the way, if you want to know more about the named queries, this is annotation. There is a good, these are the references of the named queries. So for this website, if we want to see the register, this is the design of it, and I have selected a few fields: user ID, email, password, first name, last name, recovery email. Now you are totally free to select whichever field suitable for your requirement, but there are of course basic fields, which obviously is the email, password, and more likely the user ID. These are the basic fields, and the other fields are optional. You can add whichever fields you wish. Now this is the HTML of the sign up page. Also there is something in here, you remember, the TH action, which refer to register in the controller, and the object is sign up model, which you can see it in here. And don't forget, also up in the sign up, in the register, you need to create the same model name, sign up model. Okay, now we knew about this. Let's close the fragment page, and we start checking how we will do the sign up. Again, it is the same process: DAO, model, repository, service. The DAO, we will do two methods. The first method is that we want to see when the user enter his credentials in here, we want to see these credentials, are they registered already in the database or no? So this is the first method. Will give us, is user already registered? If the user registered, then we will give him a notification that please, this user credentials already registered. If it is not registered, then we can proceed to the second method, which is add new user. Now we will implement this. Now this method, the other two methods, is later on we will talk about. We will implement these two methods in the DIO. This is the DIO. We will implement the interface, the sign up DIO interface, and it's a repository annotation. Because it's a repository, we will make some connection. We have to make connection with the database, so it's a repository. We create the superclass. We will use the hashing class. We will call AutoWire the sign up repository. Also, we will need the role repository. I will let you know about later on. Now, the first method we talked about is this user credentials registered already in the database. We have to check this. So, whichever data, whichever credentials the user entered here, we need to make sure are these credentials registered already or no. So we have to do with this implementation. With this implementation, I will go with the second way, using this class, using the session. I will not go with the login, with the repository. This will show you some differences. Now, the more differences you know, the more possibilities you have to design your web application. So I'm giving you multiple ways to design your web application at the back end. So the first thing is that we need to use this Hibernate session util class, call this class method, open a session. Now we will get the named query. We will query whatever email, user ID, password. We will query these details, these three things. We will query them using the named query, the thing that we learned before. Get named queries. Named query, check user exists or no. And the same thing, this is an HQL query, select query, sign up module, this is a module, the email and the user ID, we will check them. Do they exist in the database or no? Okay, so this is the same thing as what we have spoke before. We will set a parameter, name, in here, and we will set another parameter name for the user ID. And then we will get a result set, and we will check. If it is true, if we get a true, that means the credentials that the user have entered is already registered. So he cannot use these credentials to register again. If it is false, if the result is false, that means these credentials are not registered and the user can register a new account. This is the entire process. And then don't forget to close the session, and these are the details in here for closing the session and flushing. Also, you need to flush, by the way, so you can sign up session. And also you need to, if you wish, you can do the rollback in here, and the committing as well. So let's say, okay, this is the way how you check that the user registered or no. Now, if the user is not registered, then we go to the second method, which is add new user. We will go to the second method. Now in the second method I will use this implementation. There is one thing more I want to talk to you about. As I said, in the HQL, in the Hibernate query language, when you have a select query, you can use the login or the model and calling the fields. This is for the select only or the update. But unfortunately, HQL doesn't have an insert statement. There is a lengthy way if you wish to use the HQL for inserting data in the database. There is a lengthy way, but there is a roundabout. There is a way out. Is that you use this annotation, named native queries. What is the difference? In the HQL for the select, we will use the model class and call the fields. But with the named native queries, we will use the ordinary SQL statement. We will name the column's name in the database, same as an ordinary SQL. So we will use the SQL column names as an ordinary SQL statement. Okay? This is the difference. If you have a select, then you can use the named queries and you use the model which calls the fields. But if you want to insert data using HQL, then you have to go with named native queries, and then you add the names of the columns in the database as if you are writing a native SQL query statement. Two other things you need to, which is this one, you add the model name and you add the sign up, this one, result set mapping. What is this? This is this. In this case, when you use the native queries, you need to map every field to the corresponding column in the database. Whatever field you have made in here, in the sign up model, all these fields, last name, recovery email, whatever, you need to map them to the corresponding column in the database that you have created it. Okay? And then you give it a name, and then you can use it in here. This, the process, if you are going to insert data, persist data in the database using HQL. It's kind of a lengthy one, but this is the way how you do it. But if you have a select query or update, the story is another story. You just use named queries. Use a model and with the fields. That's it. Okay, I hope it's clear for you how you can use the annotation instead of the normal select or normal querying. Okay, now let's move to the adding new user. Now we have verified that the new user is not registered, so we need to add it to the database. The way to do it is this way. Exactly this way. Remember one thing, when the user enter his password, this password will be moved over the internet, so you have to secure it. We have secured using this object of the bcrypt password encoder, and we have to hash it so we can save it, persist it in the database as hashed password. This will give you some level of security, although it's not that much of a security, but at least it's better than nothing. And this is the way how you add the new user. Remember, you need to give you have to give this new user a role. You remember here we have 3 roles: the super user, the admin user, and the site user. So here when a new user will be persisted to the database, then you have to give a name or a role for this user, which is a site user or any other role that you have selected. And this is the way how you will do it. Okay, now once you have done this 2 steps, then you are good to go to move as per the model as we have spoke before. There is one thing to notice. No, the fields, as I told you, the fields you can decide them by yourself. How many fields you wish to add is totally up to you. You need to add them and create a super constructor and the constructor and the getters and setters. Now there is one thing, 2 things actually extra here for the sign up model. When we create the database, we said that this email column is a unique, which means that there is no 2 emails should be the same persisted in the database. No 2 emails persisted in the database are same. Each email is unique. That's why we use the unique key. Here at the model, we need to refer to this fact by indexes, index, column, list, email, DB, and we say unique true, so that it can match with the database. Okay, this is the number 1. Of course, you need to add the entity to tell that this class is an entity, it's a model. And there is another thing, and of course add the serializable. The other thing is that we need to make a join table. This join table I will talk about later on, and we give the permissions I will talk about later on for another piece, with another piece. As I said, we will talk like pieces. Every piece we will talk it, and at the end of the course you will gather all these pieces in your brain and you will be able to understand how to build a professional website, web application. So this joining the tables we will talk about in a short while. Now for the sign up repository it's the same. This is one is for the later, for the reset token. The sign up service, the same methods of the DAO, and the repository, the service sign up service implementation, we just refer is user already, we just refer the sign up DAO is user already method, and for the add user we just refer from the service to the DAO implementation. That's it. And at the end of which here we will use it as the controller. This is the method of the controller. Model attribute, we give it a name, and this is a post method. This is the routing of the sign up page. If the user already registered, you can take a look in here. If the credentials of the user that entered is registered already, then we have to give a message saying that user ID already taken or email already registered, which means this user cannot register using these credentials. He have to change the credentials. Okay, if not, then yes, in this case the user will be registered, and we give a message that the registration is successful, and then we will back to the register page. Once in both cases, if it's failed or it's succeed, we just give the message, failure message, success message, and then we will move back to the same page of the registration page, and from there the user can start logging in to his account. This is the entire process of the sign up. As you can see, the general idea is the same classes, the same interfaces, with just few minor changes that we have implemented. And for every connection with the database from your application, you have to go with the same things, with the same process. Now there is another thing, which is checking the email. So let's see what is this. If the user forgot his password, he needs to reset his password, his or her password. So we will click on forgot password link, and the user will enter his email. This is the same process of checking that we have done with the login and with the sign up. The same thing, the same process: DAO, model, repository, service, and finally the controller for the check email. The same process, but in this process there will be some add-ons that we need to use to reset the password. But for the checking of the process, it's the same. It's the same. We created check email DAO implementation, as you can see here. Check email DAO implementation. Check email model, the same thing. Check email repository, service as well. So it's the same thing. But in this case, when the user wants to reset his password, we will have an extra steps for sending an email, because once he enters his email and validate, it will be checked. The email will be checked. If it's already registered, then an email, a reset link will be sent to that email. Once the user get that email with the reset link, he will click on it. And once click on it, will redirect it back to the web application, where he will change the new password. He will select a new password. This is the process. But in general, the checking is the same thing. So this we will talk in the next video. Thank you very much.